Got it. So without further ado, I will give you Linnea, who is talking to us from Dover, New Hampshire. Go ahead, Linnea. And
Hello, can everyone
I'm
hear me?
gonna, yeah, I'm
yes,
gonna mute everybody.
and then Linnea, you need to turn yours back on, honey.
Okay. Um, so yeah, so Dad's story is correct. And in my late 20s, I began writing the series of the Golden Wolf trilogy. It took me probably maybe almost like 5 to 7 years from when I started to have a manuscript that I got represented by an agent. And then I had some drama with an agent that added some time to the publication time. So the first book was published by HarperCollins in 2017, and the subsequent books each year after that. And the trilogy has been translated into 6 other languages and published in different countries. And so that was, so when I wanted to give you that background because Dad invited me to give a talk on, so you want to write a novel. And so I have some experience, or not a novel, actually a book, not just a novel, although novels, fiction is my area of expertise. I have some advice that would be helpful if you want to write a nonfiction book or a memoir as well. And I have a presentation to share. All right, can you see that? Thumbs up?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, and we can
Great.
see your slides on the left. Do you want to do start the presentation?
Yeah. We'll see if that works. It does not always. Okay.
Bingo.
Okay, great. But even after writing 3 books in a trilogy where you would think that I would have, like, writing the second book was very different from writing the first book. Writing the third book was different from that. From talking to my author friends, once you learn how to write a book, you've learned how to write that book. But each book is its own animal, and I've written some books that are currently sitting in drawers that may never see the light of day, or I may dust them off in a year or 5 or 10. So I've learned, I've written a lot. I've published a bit of that. I have been somewhat successful, but I would like to be more successful. So I'm going to, share some things that I've learned when writing my books, but there's a lot of different ways to do this. And if you ask, every writer you ask will have different tips and tricks. So let's see, I'm going to try to see everyone because I want to, I don't know. I wanted to ask people to raise their hands if they had thought about writing a book or were interested in writing a book. So I won't be able to see all of you, but yeah. Okay. So some, but not everyone. All right. Well, some of you will see this and then be glad you're not trying to write a book. So hopefully it will do that as well. So I wanted to start off with some just facts about books that people may not know. Partially because my mom, I'm going to throw you under the bus a little bit here. My mom is sort of noodling on a book idea. And I think she'd written about 1,400 words. And she called me up and asked, how long is a book? And I had to give her the bad news that books, fiction novels, usually the ones paperbacks that you buy in a store are going to be about 100,000 words. My novels are all between 140 and 160,000 words. So that's a lot of words. And we measure books in word count rather than pages because you can put a lot of words on a page or very few words on a page. And so word count is the best way to get a real sense of the length of a book. Nonfiction can be shorter. Young adult children's books are a lot shorter. But generally they're a hefty number of words. If you're thinking about traditional publishing, the time between getting a book contract, which can be a long time after you start, and publication can be 1 to 2 years. And most authors do 5 or more drafts even before they start working with an agent. I know I've done that many on all of my books. So I think the first question to ask yourself is, should I write a book? And I think these are good questions to ask yourself at any point in the process of writing, whether you're writing a book or just noodling around to see if you're trying, if what you're writing could turn into a book. And I think it's good to kind of understand this stuff about yourself and your project. So questions like, why do I want to write a book? There are a lot of good reasons. I often don't know what I know about something until I start writing it down. So for me, writing about a subject helps me understand it. I'm also an avid reader. So when I'm writing, I'm telling a story that I want to read. You could be an expert in something and want to communicate it to the world. You could have an argument you want to make. You might want to share stories, things that have happened to you, or stories that you've made up and you just want people to read them. I think these are all great reasons for reading a book, for writing a book. But I do want to discourage writing a book because you want to get published, because oftentimes that doesn't happen. And also, while getting published was really, really wonderful, it was a fleeting part of the overall experience of being a writer, which is a lot of just sitting in front of a page, writing, editing, editing, and editing, and editing. And so for me, it wouldn't have been enough to sustain the project. Another good thing to ask is, who do I want to read my book? And I think this can be helpful too when you're writing, is to think about your reader. You know, when I was writing my trilogy, my reader was actually me at the age that I had the idea. My ideal reader was someone who was interested in myths and legends and liked swords and battles and romance, and that was me. So I was telling the story to myself. I mean, other people have liked it too, but that was the person I had in mind. But it might be, you know, your family and friends. It might be, you know, if you love a particular genre, it might be mystery readers, it might be thriller readers, it might be people who are interested in learning more about a particular time period. But it's good to think about that. And then it's also good to think about what your goals are for the project. And there's some overlap with this, but, and that's where you can get into thinking about if you want to publish it or not. You know, if those guidelines for word count are a lot more important. If you're trying to get someone else to publish it, you can pretty much self-publish something of any length. So it's worthwhile to think about the goals. So once you've thought about those things, should you write a book? I mean, I think it's always great to give it a try. You can see what happens. You know, you never have to show it to anyone. You can just show it to a few people. It's worthwhile. It can be frustrating, but it's worthwhile to try. But writing a book is a lot of work, and most of it is done by yourself. Though a writing group or class can help. I think I've met a lot of people who want to write books who don't love reading. And for me, I question whether writing a book is really the right thing for them, because when you're writing a book, you also are going to read it a million times. And if you don't love reading, if you love something else more than reading, like, you know, some other narrative form more than reading, you might want to make a short film or write a poem or something like that. If you're writing fiction, are you writing in a genre that you know and love? When I was just a baby writer who really wanted to be a writer but didn't know what I wanted to write, I thought, romance looks easy. I'm going to try writing romance. But it's not. And I don't like romance, like just straight up romance novels that much. They're hard to write well. They're especially hard to write well if you don't really like the genre that much. So I don't think any kind of writing is really easy. And it's important to write something that you're going to be really obsessed with and interested in, have an interest that's going to sustain you through a really long project. But you can find out if that's true or not by writing and seeing you know, where you run out of steam. And then is it something that's gonna, if you're really gonna commit to spending a lot of time on something, is it gonna be a worthwhile use of your time, even if very few people read it? For me, I really like to write historical fiction because I love, for many reasons, but one of them is I love the research process, and I get a lot out of, it sort of gives me a focus to my history reading. So I get that out of writing a project, even if no one else ever reads it, among other things. And then also, I think people hold up books as like the be all end all, but you don't have to write a full length book to still tell stories and then get your thoughts out there. StoryCorps is a neat organization that pairs people up with interviewers who elicit life stories from them. I know a lot of people who've really enjoyed taking classes with The Moth, where they learn to tell verbal stories out loud better. There's, with the internet, you can blog if you want to get shorter opinion pieces out there. I think I still like to journal, even though I'm writing fiction. That can be, you can journal and see what it turns into. Some people prefer writing short stories. I find short stories really hard to write, actually. In fact, I couldn't really think of myself as a writer until I stopped making myself write short stories. But for some people, short stories are much easier than novels. So that's another option. And then also, if you like to tell stories out loud, there's podcasts for, you start your own podcast or get on a podcast where people share stories about things. So there's a lot of options, and I'm sure you could think of others. But presuming after all that you do want to try writing a book, there's some ways to, I have some ways to kind of get started and ways to keep going when things are getting hard. So first I want to talk about fiction versus nonfiction. I do find, and I'm making a lot of assumptions about my audience here, but I do find when I talk to people who are just thinking about writing a book, they are really concerned with the publication and agents and querying process, even though that really comes much, much later. So I did want to say some things up front about that, but I do think that the most important thing is writing the book and then figuring out how you're going to put it out into the world. So, nonfiction concerns a real subject that you have some expertise in. If you do have an area of expertise and you are interested in getting it published in a traditional way, the nice thing about nonfiction is that you can start querying agents with 3 sample chapters and a serious outline. So if that is something that you're interested in, there's a little bit of a shorter path to getting agent interest. Fiction, you do have to have a full manuscript. I find in fiction, voice and memorable writing is more important, though writing quality is going to be important no matter what. And you need a complete edited manuscript to query. And I'm less familiar with memoir as a genre, but in general, one needs a full manuscript to query a memoir as well. And now I'm going to give some advice about getting started. And I recommend reading a lot of writers on writing, that, but not just that, but Stephen, and I have some resources at the end, but Stephen King wrote a good book on writing, Ursula Le Guin. There's a lot of writers who've written very good books on writing. I think sometimes they can be intimidating, but also they can have a really nice invitation into the process. And there's a lot of, I think every writer has their own process, and I've changed my process from time to time. But I think, and I'm going to talk more about fiction because that's what I know more. But with nonfiction, I do think that an outline is going to be pretty important because you have certain subject areas you want to cover. But still, you don't need to start, and with both fiction and nonfiction, you don't need to start with the beginning and write straight through to the end. And so you may want to start with some of the things you're most interested in and kind of expand out from there. With fiction, I've always found that, it's hard to complete a project no matter what, but it's impossible to complete a project if you don't know where you're going. So my very strongest advice for starting a novel is have some kind of end in mind. It may not be the same, you may change your mind later about what the end is, but I've always found I need to be writing towards something. Cory Doctorow, who was a teacher at NYU, where I did a master's in fine arts in writing, didn't believe in outlining because he always said, when you're driving at night, you can, I'm going to paraphrase, when you're driving at night, you can only see as far as your headlights, but you can drive the whole way that way. But you have to know where you're going. You can't, I mean, you're not going to, you'll get somewhere, but you won't get where you're trying to go with your headlights if you don't have an end in mind. And then I do like outlining. Like when I first start, I like to have at least some big moments that I know I want to hit. But I really believe in outlining as kind of as a tool rather than a map or a guide or a recipe or an instruction manual. I'll usually write probably 20 to 30,000 words, which is for me is about a fifth of my total word count. And then I'll really feel like I need more organization about where I'm going. So I'll stop, I'll write my plot points on index cards. I'll do some rearranging of them. I'll record what I decide. Excuse me. And then I almost never go back to that outline. It's the, I'll use it. I'll have it in my mind. I might look at it a few times, but it's the process of doing it that will help me get my mind straight about what I need to do next. And then I might get stuck again, and I might go through that process again. And so yeah, so it can be a really good tool, but it's, I haven't met any writers who, of fiction at least, who start with an outline, completely stick to it and never change it, and then have a finished manuscript at the end that perfectly adheres to it. Because for me at least, and for a lot of my writer friends, you discover things as you write. And that's one of the really fun things about it. Like if you know the whole story before you start and everything that happens, for me at least, that's really boring. It's much more interesting to write and kind of discover what needs to happen and maybe be wrong and throw some things out, but always to be flexible, but still have an idea of where you think you're going. I also feel like a problem, I mean, that I still have to this day, but definitely had as a beginning writer was too much self-censorship. And so I really believe it's important just to keep on getting word count out, even if you don't end up keeping all those words, and not to get too worried about editing things until you have a complete manuscript, because you can, I knew it, there was a guy in my MFA program who had edited the first 30 pages. He spent 2 years working on the first 30 pages of his novel and never wrote any more than that. And we tried to tell him, to ask him to write more, and he never did. They were very good, but it wasn't a novel. And I really think it would have been better for him to push through and have a very imperfect 100,000 words than a very perfect 10,000 words. So even now, when I'm finding writing a little more difficult, I'm trying to write 500 words a day and put them into a document, and I'm worrying about their order and fixing them later. And when things are really going for me, I will get I'll get up to 2,000 words a day, which you can turn out 100,000 words pretty quickly that way, but you still then have to do a lot of editing on them. And here's some more tips for keeping going. I really recommend joining a writing class or group. I think it helps to, the most important thing is actually to read other people's writing and start thinking about other people's writing critically, because I think it'll help you see your own writing and it's what it needs in a clearer way, because it's a great opportunity to have people to motivate you who are in the same boat as you. I think I've mentioned my at least word count goals and 50 perfect pages, outlining. When I'm writing fiction, I like to ask myself questions all the time and make sure that I'm keeping them in mind. Like, what do my characters want? How are they coming into conflict? How do they grow and change? I have read a lot of people's, and even published works that are very dull, that where the main characters don't seem to want anything. That's the surest way to grab a reader, is to give your main character something that they want and then put obstacles in their way to keep them from getting it, because then your reader will want to know how they achieve their goals or fail to. And that's actually good advice for memoir writing as well. You're writing about yourself and things that have happened to you, think about what you wanted in that moment and what was standing in your way. And that can be a really good way to kind of find the point of a story. I also believe in reading widely, reading in your genre and out of your genre. You'll find things you like and don't like. You'll find things that work and don't work. You'll find things that have been done a million times and maybe you want to do something different. And so I feel like writers should never stop reading. And when I was writing the Golden Wolf trilogy, I did a ton of reading about Viking Age Norway. Even when I felt like I knew enough about the subject, I kept reading because it helped keep my mind in 1200 years ago. So I would always have my brain thinking about barrows and swords and mountains and things like that. And it just helped keep me in the world of the books. And then when you do finish your rough draft, it's a good to put it away for a while and come back to it with fresh eyes before you start editing. And also toast yourself, because finishing a rough draft, finishing a complete narrative is really hard. It's a lot of work. I admire anyone who does it, no matter whether they get published or not, or whether they just put it in a drawer or only share it with their family. It's a huge achievement. So I want to leave lots of room for questions, and I hope I've addressed things that questions that you've had already. But I did want to say a few words about agents querying and publishing. Traditional publishing, like HarperCollins, does require an agent, and the agent will often do a lot of editing with you before submitting a book for publication. And there's some things I've talked about already about when you should query, but there's also lots of options. There's a lot of hybrid presses now that accept unagented manuscripts, so that can be a good sort of middle ground. They tend to publish faster, and also they don't pay as much, but you will see your work in print faster, and they still have some marketing and some editing. And self-publishing is great if you just want to see your stuff out there. But no matter what, I really recommend, working with a writing group, and potentially, if you're going without an agent, hiring a freelance editor to work on your stuff as well. We can all benefit from another set of eyes. And I just think if you're putting, a year of your life or more into something, it's worth it. Even if you mostly expect family and friends to read it, it's worth having it polished and typo free so that their experience of it will be enjoyable. And I know I'm just so typo prone, it's ridiculous. So I have to have a lot of readers of my work before it's ready for public consumption. So in conclusion, writing is great. I will never stop, but it's also really hard. Even after getting books published, I have a lot of, I may not ever get another book published, but I'm still going to keep writing, or I may. And I think it's worth trying, because I think it's a way to think about the world and to work through your thoughts. That's different than talking out loud, and it's different than just thinking in your head. It causes new thought pathways to form. It causes you to work things out differently. For me, it causes me to get more clear about things, because I know I have to make myself understood to someone else. So I find writing to be really, really rewarding. And so now I want to open it up to questions.
And Linnea, why don't you stop sharing screen now, and then that way we'll have a different view of all the participants.
Okay, well then I wanted to finish with, I have some resources that, and I can share this presentation, Dad, and there's There's writing classes that I recommend. I took some classes with Gotham Writers Workshop when I was first starting. All of these have online classes. In person is great too, but in these days, online might be even better. There's some books that I've particularly liked, although there's a huge number of writing books out there. I think I would especially mention Reading Like a Writer by Francine Prose, because it's a really neat way to look at how she does deep reading to learn from other writers. Some websites, and then my books, if you want to check them out. If Dad hasn't really, I mean, he's my best salesman, so you probably don't need a link, but all right, now I will stop presenting and stop sharing, and we can get the full screen.
Make sure, everybody, that you unmute so that we can hear your question.
And Dad, I'll let you do the wrangling of people to.
Yes, okay, Peter.
Okay, here's, if you like, a question for you on your personal writing. My wife has one of her old high school classmates who is an author. She was married to she's married to a man who was a small college president. So most of her novels are about small college life, small town life, often with the theme of gardening underlying, because she's a gardener. She's written quite a few books. She says the most difficult scenes to write are the bodice ripping scenes. Would you care to comment?
With the body?
Bodice
Ripping scenes. Oh yeah, especially knowing my parents are going to read them. We'll just leave it at that. Yes.
I should point out that she's now 80.
Well, then her parents may not be alive to read those scenes, but yeah, well, I'll be a little more, I'll say a little more, which I think for me at least, and I even in romance novels that I've read and liked, the bodice ripping scenes, the sex scenes are, I think about them very similarly to any kind of, to a battle almost, not in the terms of the conflict, but in terms of, it's something that could be established very quickly, like they fought, he won. So what is going to happen during the course of the scene to make you learn more about the characters? So with both a battle scene and a sex scene, I'm not going to put it in unless the characters go through something, grow and change, are challenged in some way during the course of the scene. So that helps me write them, but also gives them a purpose, because we can always fade to black also.
Next question. Jim.
Are you able to work on more than one book at a time?
Not really. I keep on kind of wanting to try, and I do have a couple books in progress right now, but I just like, I have trouble sort of keeping my head in the space of even the one book that I'm working on, and trying to switch headspaces is hard. And also, one of my favorite writing teachers and first writing teachers as an adult said that you should only write a book about something that you're obsessed with, because you're going to spend so long with it. And you need to sustain that interest. And getting into that obsessed like way of being in the world. I mean, obsessions aren't really something you can have more than one of at once, or not me anyway.
Back to Peter.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Ken, you're next.
You've written at least a trilogy, and you've written several books. And I wonder how often authors put all their ideas into the first book, and the first book is a success and following books are not. And the one thing that comes to mind way back, I read the book, The Godfather, the one that became a movie by Mario Puzo, I think. And I thought it was a terrific novel. So I immediately bought his next one, which was called Fools Die. And it was atrocious. And I mentioned this to the owner of a bookstore in town. It was the bookstore was Mac Books. It's gone out of business now. And the owner said, yes, fools die, fools buy.
I mean, second book syndrome is a thing, and I may be suffering it with it right now, even though I have a trilogy out, because the trilogy, like I had that full plot arc in my plans, and but for me at least, it hasn't been a problem of having of running out of ideas or anything. It's just that, I mean, I don't know what it is. I wrote a book a couple years ago and shared it with my agent, and it had many ideas, maybe too many ideas in it. But she didn't think that it was anywhere near ready, and I put it away since then. Yeah, so I'm not sure. I feel like oftentimes publishers want kind of the same thing again from a writer who's been successful, especially Mario Puzo, and so that can create you may be kind of mining the same area again. People like their writers to be brands that always, they're restaurants that always produce the same dish. But I think for a lot of writers that can be very boring for them. And so that may be why that happens.
Ken, you had a question?
Yep. I've got a couple of them. I'll do the first one right now. In putting together the summary of your mini bio that we sent out to the members, I noticed your education background is quite unique. I'm an engineer, and you know, I looked at what you've done, and it's a great example of left brain, right brain. I'm wondering who does the writing, who does the imagining, how the left and right brains work together, being somebody material science, and then the whole writing background, everything you've done.
I mean, I think the writing is, you know, that is the very creative, non-rational, even like I think sometimes the writing very quickly, just getting 500 words out and not thinking about it, is a way I try to bypass the rational brain to get to things that that I don't get to systematically. But also, you know, novel has a lot of moving parts, and I actually used a project management software for my second and third Viking novels because I needed to get like every single character to this one battle. And I joked that I was project managing Vikings. And so I do think that some of that systematic thinking can be helpful for, especially for writing a novel where things do need to have like internal logical consistency, and cause and effect need to be obeyed. And so I think about it as kind of using both sides of my brain.
Charlie, will give you a crack at it and then come back to you, Ken.
Perfect.
Sure, thank you, Mark. In your talk, you mentioned voice, and I'm curious about that, having been in a bit of a debate once with an editor. And so who has the more important or larger role in determining voice of a book, the editor or the writer?
Oh, definitely the editor. I mean, the writer. Sorry, the editors don't do. Yeah, no, definitely the writer. I mean, the writer gets final say at the end. For one thing, I can tell my copy editor I want to leave my misspellings in. I don't, but I can. So yeah. I mean, I think, and with the agents and editors I've had, the only times usually I feel like they're working at making my work better, and they see what it is and what it could be and what it should be. And so their suggestions are helping achieve that goal. And so the few times I pushed back on things, it's when I felt like it was going against that.
Well, thank you. That's what I told my editor. We discussed it for quite a while, and I eventually prevailed.
Well, I mean, why is an editor even agreed to work with you, unless you've hired them, if they don't like your voice? I mean, like, no. The voice is what the author brings. I mean, it's one of the many things the author brings.
It was a nonfiction book, strictly technical, so I was more familiar with that than if I'd written fiction.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that with questions on English grammar. Mm-hmm. Boldly go where no author has been before.
The split infinitive is getting more and more accepted.
I find this, you must have any split infinitives, absolutely frustrating, because people talk with split infinitives.
I'm sorry, do you find the rule frustrating or people doing it
I find the
frustrating?
rule frustrating because I find that a lot of people, as they speak, would split an infinitive.
Yes, and end a sentence in a preposition,
But then that one I will not do.
up with which you will not put.
I will put of which in the sentence. So the
Well,
other,
I think you have to be comprehensible and you have to be what, but especially in fiction, you need to follow the rules that are congruent with your voice, and language changes and evolves. There are things that I don't like using access as a verb, impact as a verb. I hate that. I won't do it. There are tics that annoy me, but there's a lot of books that have those tics in them now. So it's, these things evolve. The youngsters are doing different stuff now.
Ken, you had another question.
Yeah, sure. This is on the more technical side. Right now, I'm pulling together, I've just got one folder. I just keep dumping stuff in, thoughts and everything else. And I can really attest to reading about the topic. One of the bullet points you had up there, because as I read somebody else on a topic similar in the general area, that opens up all kinds of ideas I've yet to have. So that's a really good recommendation you gave us. Now, in doing this, I'm going to do a lot of quoting of other material, other people's material. So right from the beginning, if I don't keep track of where some of these quotes come from, writing the book will only be half the job. Doing the appendix in the back will be the other half, and I don't want to get stuck there. How should I move forward? I'm familiar with Microsoft Word, been using that for years, but what should I be using as tools? How should I go about keeping documentation tracks on a nonfiction book to make life easier in the future?
As a writer of fiction, I keep a list so I can give recommended reading in the back, but I don't have to worry about that nearly as much. My mother, Karen Hartsuyker, might be a better person to ask, because there actually is software for managing annotations and things like that I think is people use for writing dissertations. And I think Microsoft Word actually does have some annotation functionality in it. But I would definitely look at that, because it's great to keep track of that as you go along. If you're going to have footnotes and attributions and things, you don't want to have to be backfilling all of that later.
when is plagiarism not plagiarism? I ask this because if you read a lot, you get, maybe there's some phrases that stick in your mind and you have no idea where they come from, and you stick this phrase in. So obviously, if you copy entire paragraphs, that's plagiarism. But what if there are 4 words in a line?
That's not plagiarism. You can't copyright that. And
At what point would you say that it becomes hazy? A sentence?
Probably a full sentence, especially a longish sentence that's exactly the same, might be starting to be on the borderline. But anything shorter than that, and you even see there's been some plagiarism cases recently where people have kind of actually produced evidence that they arrived in a similar place from different starting points. So don't copy and paste, but otherwise, if something sticks in your mind, it's probably okay. And there is an aphorism that good writers borrow and great writers steal. So if you do a good enough job, you'll make it your own.
It was an interesting point there, slightly off track, but I spent a year in the US Department of State, and the mantra there was plagiarism is not a dirty word. If somebody has already written it in a good form, you can lift the whole thing.
It depends what you're doing with it. And also I will note that I am not a lawyer. Let the record show.
Okay, we got Karen is with us here.
So I was wondering, what is a good way to find a writer's group? and you find that it's useful to, probably nobody meets in person anymore, but what's a good way to find like-minded writers?
I think libraries often run writers groups, and meetup groups can be a good way to do it. But also I know Gotham Writers Workshop has nonfiction tracks as well as fiction tracks, and the other Grub Street and Catapult are, and there's others like online writing workshops that have classes and classes can be good, especially when you're starting out, to have a facilitator and a professional writer to help guide things. So it's not the, I won't say the blind leading the blind, but the inexperienced leading the inexperienced. But yeah, libraries are also often a good way to find writers groups, especially in person.
Okay, we got time for one more question. We're after 2:00. So, Peter, you seem to have lots of them today. Go ahead.
Well, what I want to know is, if you're an unknown author, what sort of but it's a good book. What sort of royalty do you expect? I know in textbooks, which I've done, it's 10%. It's the vast majority goes to the publisher, but they have to do a lot of publicity for textbooks. So I wonder how much a fiction author can expect and how much you have to pay your agent. What percent to the agent?
The agent gets 15%. That's pretty standard, and and that's 15% of what would otherwise come to me. And all I can tell you is what happened for me. I got, as an unknown author, but whose book was acquired by a pretty high up editor at HarperCollins, I got a very large advance that allowed me to live for 4 years without having a job, another job. So that was really awesome. And then the royalties, I think one of the countries where I've been published, I had a very small advance and I started to get royalties. But, and the royalties are 10 to 20% based on various metrics and sales numbers and things like that. But the vast majority of books published by major publishing houses, they don't expect to ever pay royalties to their authors. The advance, they hope to earn out the advance, if that.
Oh, I see.
So
yeah. So
you can't count on.
The agent's fee come out of the author's proceeds or separately?
Yes, it comes out of the author's proceeds.
So 15% of the total, or 15% of what the author gets paid?
15% of what the author gets paid.
Okay. Yeah.
And so when I say earning out the advance, let's say I had a book with a $10,000 advance, that's an advance on royalties. So they need to sell enough that I would have gotten $10,000 worth of royalties in order for me to start seeing money.
Yeah, of course.
But it's not an advance in terms of I have to pay it back if the royalties don't come through. It is my money.
Yeah.
As long as the book gets published.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and call this a wrap. Anybody else? All right.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linnea. Linnea, if you would please send me the PowerPoint or outline, I'll make sure it gets